My name is Kudakwashe Midzi. I am a client manager in the Export Development Department at Zimtrade. I just thought that in case there's some people who don't know about Zimtrade, Zimtrade is we are the national trade development and promotion organization for Zimbabwe, and our mandate is basically to energize Zimbabwe's export growth. And in terms of how we endeavor to achieve this, and I hope this will also answer the earlier question that you mentioned. Basically, we try and facilitate and support existing exporters or would-be exporters through various services that we provide. And these are basically broken down into four. And I will not go into much detail on the service portfolio. If there's any need for any further clarity, I'm sure I'll share my details and we can always pick up the conversations later. But basically, the four main services that we provide are market intelligence, which I think is actually going to form the base of my sharing today, wherein we share information about markets, potential markets, export opportunities that exist out there for the benefit of potential and existing exporters. We also do what we call export development. And in export development, basically what we try, which is the department that I'm in. Okay, I think now I can share my screen. Thank you very much for that. Our other service is export development. Here we now basically we deal with those would-be exporters who are in need of capacity building, technical intervention, and expertise, and we provide support to any and all would-be exporters who are in need of this export development. Then we also have what we call export promotion, and here we promote exports through participation in trade fairs, and buyer-seller missions. Basically, the idea here is to bring local producers or local exporters closer to the market where you can then interact with potential buyers. And then the last and final aspect of our services is advocacy, which basically involves situations where exporters might be facing challenges with regulatory authorities, or they might have recommendations in order to make their doing business environment better. And basically, we then assist exporters in that regard. Now, moving on to the main reason why we're here today, which is your sweet potatoes. And I'm happy. I'm sorry I didn't get the name of I think she was the first presenter when she was presenting. She mentioned one important aspect that I think all participants here as well need to be cognizant of in terms of when she was speaking. I think most of you can recall that she mentioned yellow flesh variety. So from a Zimtrade point of view, when we're talking about exports, I think it's important to note that basically even all the information that I'm going to be sharing in terms of markets, it's with regards to this yellow flesh variety, not the usual white flesh variety that we are all used to and we love here in Zimbabwe. So I will be sharing the names of the varieties as well later on. But basically here I was also trying to put it into perspective in terms of what the global market of sweet potatoes looked like in the past 5 years. And as you can see, there has been a growth of the global imports of sweet potatoes, where in 2015 the global imports were almost 400 million, and in 2019 we're sitting at around 685 million. As you can see, there has been a steady growth, which basically means that the market is there and it's growing for sweet potatoes, and it's an opportunity that as Zimbabweans we can tap into. And in terms of obviously the next question would be, who are these top countries that are importing these sweet potatoes? And so you'll find that if you analyze the statistics for the past 5 years, the two major importers of sweet potatoes have been the UK and the Netherlands. And actually from 2015 up to 2018, the largest importer was the UK, and the Netherlands has since taken over in 2019 We're not sure if this is going to be, this situation is going to be prevailing going forward. But basically, the Netherlands and the UK are the top global importers of sweet potatoes, where the Netherlands accounted for 21% of global imports, and the UK alone accounted for 16%. And then you also have in the top 10 countries like Germany, Canada, France, Belgium, Japan, Thailand. And I think it's also important to highlight at this stage that in terms of quantities, globally, in 2019, the total imported tonnage was about 824,000 kilos, or 824,000 tons of sweet potatoes were imported globally. And as I mentioned, the Netherlands was the top importer, and they imported 151,681 tons of sweet potatoes, and the UK stood at 137,000. And in terms of prices, I know obviously, again, that's a very important aspect that we are interested in as growers or as potential exporters. The global price per ton for sweet potatoes was $831 per ton. And then the Netherlands alone, their price stood at $958 per ton. And the UK had their average price was $784. And I think the market with the highest price in 2019 was actually Germany, which in terms of tonnage, it only imported about 40,000 tons. But then in terms of price, it stood at $1,436 per ton of sweet potatoes. So I just thought I would share this information to give you a perspective as you heard all the other information. You want to get into the growing of sweet potatoes. Obviously, these figures in terms of who the largest importers are, and these basically present potential markets for you and what the pricing looks like. And on this slide, I was also I'm basically showing everyone the export windows that are available. So this is actually coming from, well, we're looking at it from the Netherlands point of view. And this is an availability calendar for sweet potatoes. What I'm trying to say here is, if you can look at the first row, that's the United States. So the United States is one of the biggest suppliers of sweet potatoes globally. And basically, they almost always have sweet potatoes available in season. And you're also looking at Senegal. Again, they almost always have sweet potatoes in season. Why this is important, it also gives you as growers a perspective in terms of who your competition is going to be if you're going to go into these markets. And then you also have the likes of Portugal and the likes of Spain. So this availability calendar, I think I would say lucky for us, we managed to get it from some potential buyers in the Netherlands. And basically the indication in terms of supply window or potential supply window for Zimbabwe, you're looking at that period between April and September. If we can manage to grow our sweet potatoes and start supplying or target supplying the European market during that period, that's the time when you can get some of these lucrative prices. As I mentioned, some of the prices that I mentioned, those are average prices. So as you may all appreciate, in fresh produce, you have the highs and the lows in terms of pricing in the market. So if you can manage to grow and target for that period, then you might get yourself some very good prices out of the market. And this is also just a picture to show you how sweet potatoes are packaged in the Netherlands, in Europe. And at the bottom there, those are names of potential or basically buyers of sweet potatoes in Europe. And if you can manage to convince them to start supplying your sweet potatoes, or sorry, if I may just go back to the previous slide. At the far left here, this is your your varieties. I had mentioned earlier on that I would then mention the varieties that you need to know or that you need to grow if you're trying to target the European market. That's your Beauregard and Covington varieties, not our white flesh varieties. So these are your yellow flesh varieties, and I'm pretty sure some who may have benefited or who may have had to taste these varieties, you'll appreciate that they also actually have a different texture and a different taste compared to our local ones. So, and please take note, if you try to get a market, if you try to export our usual white flesh varieties, you will not get the market. So it's important to know the varieties that are in demand in some of these markets before you rush to produce and start looking for markets. So as I was saying, in terms of packaging, I do have a slide later on which speaks on some of the packaging requirements. So some export in those boxes that you can see on the far left. And then on the middle there, this is your bulk packaging where the produce goes in the form of bins, bulk bins. And then the buyer or the importer would then, they themselves would then do the selection. And then in terms of shape on the far right, that's usually the preferred shape. I think as some of you may appreciate, there are some, I think in terms of how most Europeans would then want to have their produce, it's at times in the form of chips, sweet potato chips. So in terms of the shape, they have to be shaped in the form where upon cutting, the buyer can make chips out of them. So basically that's it. Please forgive me, I'm trying to rush through and make sure that I cover all the aspects within the 5 minutes that I've been given. So in terms of the requirements from an export markets point of view, I think some of these areas have already been touched on, especially, so the first important aspect that we need to take note of is that whenever you want to export, each shipment has to be accompanied by complete set of documentation, and it doesn't matter where the size of the consignment, whether you're exporting a 30-foot container or you're exporting 10 kgs worth of product. And these are your set of documentation. These include your CD1 form, your agro-dealer certificate, your phytosanitary certificates, and the like. And the second aspect, which as I mentioned, I think it's already been mentioned, so there's no need for me to repeat that you need to get an agro-dealer or agro-producer certificate from AMA, and they've already given their address. And if, for those who might not know where AMA is and you know where Zimtrade is, we're literally across from each other. So if you come to Zimtrade, you can literally see, it's a stone throw away literally at the Agricultural Marketing Authority. And then you also need to get an export permit from the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture and Rural Settlement, and it's issued for a specific quantity and a time period. And in terms of where they are located, they are at number 1 Borodale Road, soon after the State House, and the building is called Ngungunyana Building. Then you also need to get a phytosanitary certificate, and this is obtained from the Plant Quarantine and Research Institute. So they have offices in Mazoe or at the Harare Airport office, and this basically is a certificate that attests that your product meets the phyto requirements. This is basically an assessment in terms of, you know, the chemicals that you've applied and the residue levels, if any, that's remaining on your product. You also need to complete a CD1 form, but basically this can be obtained from your bank, and it's an exchange control requirement, and there's no two ways about it in terms of getting a CD1 form, and you can talk to your bank about that process. And then you need to process your bill of entry with Zimra at Kurima House. So, and it's important to note that this is just a basic process flow, and some markets will specify other documents that are outside of these basic documents that I've mentioned. So it's important to note that when you then want to start exporting, you need to understand from the market's point of view what their regulatory or even voluntary requirements are. And you also need, when you're dealing with the European market, you also need certain certifications. I've got a slide on that, such as Global Gap. And it's also important to know that you need to engage a consultant who specializes in the particular certification schemes or food safety standards required by your market. And I think for Global Gap, we do have, for those who may know him, we do have one of those consultants is Clarence Mwale. And I think it's a name that resonates across most farmers or agricultural people. And then you need to also engage the licensed certification body and will be specialized in the certification scheme, because at times you might engage a certification body that is not licensed, and you end up spending so much money on getting a certification that will not be recognized in the respective market. And it's also important to note that when you're dealing with the European market, you need to comply with certain legislation, and these legislation includes, and they're listed here, control of contaminants in foodstuffs, control of pesticide residues, health control, plant health control, traceability, compliance, and labeling, and voluntary. And I think someone mentioned the issue of organic production. There are some as well voluntary compliance requirements that if you then want to have your product certified organic, because I think one other aspect that we most Zimbabweans mistake is we might be growing produce organically or with minimum use of chemicals, but then it's not organic unless it's certified organic. So you might believe you can go tell whoever you want that you produce this sweet potato organically, but if you don't have the certification, then you don't have the evidence or the proof that it was organically certified. So basically that's one thing that's worth noting. So coming back to packaging, in terms of the requirements, I know I spoke a bit about it, but like I said, the requirements would differ between the customers and the markets. As I mentioned earlier, some would require that you bring them in the boxes, like shown earlier, or like you can see in the picture there, or some would require that you supply them in bulk bins. And so in terms of how they must be packed to protect the produce properly, and the packaging needs to be new and clean and of high quality to prevent damage to the product. And in terms of labeling, this is specific again to the EU. You must take note of the name of the food, in this case, which is your sweet potato, the net quantity of the produce, the country of origin, the name under which the product is sold, which is probably your company name, or if you're going through another person or consolidator, durability date, and the storage conditions. And it's also worth noting that it's now mandatory to include the nutritional declaration. And I think, again, you need to then take your produce for testing. And in terms of the labeling itself, it's also worth noting that the ink that is used on the label must not be toxic ink or glue when you're labeling. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there are some voluntary standards, but what has since been a prevailing trend when you're dealing, especially with the European Union market, Global Gap certification is not a mandatory requirement, but then you will not be able to access the market if you're not Global Gap certified. This has since become the norm, that your buyers in the EU will require that you're Global Gap certified. And so you need to take note of this if you're going to be looking at those markets. And this is basically a standard which is designed to assure customers about how you produce your food on the farm. And it also covers issues of the chemicals that you use, the labor that you use. Are you treating your workers healthy? Are the workers healthy? Are they safe? And as well, your animals that you have, if you have animals on the farm. Then you also have other certifications like Fair Trade, which is an independent, again, and non-for-profit organization which promotes sustainable development and poverty alleviation and it sets the fair trade standards. And these basically, if you comply with these, it can enhance your price again in the market. You have an extra bargaining chip when you're dealing with buyers if you have some of these certifications. But then again, also important to note, the minimum voluntary requirement in terms of the European Union is the global gap. You can still access the market with just global gap and as well the mandatory requirements and without the other fair trade organic certification. But like I said, if you want to then get a premium price on a produce, obviously it's important to then look at other standards. I think this basically brings me to the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to leave with these few points. I think when you're dealing with exports, I think one important aspect that even as Zimbabwe we've always spoke about is competitiveness. We need to be competitive for us to be able to export sustainably. And the issue of regulatory and voluntary standards can never be overlooked and can never be ignored. We need to adhere to these quality and food safety standards if we're going to make it in these markets. And we can also achieve price competitiveness through improved efficiency. This comes back to us. How are we handling our businesses? How are we handling our production? And we can take things a step further if we're efficient, and we can then be price competitive. And we also need to develop strong value chains that are geared for exports. I think this is self-explanatory. When you're producing value chain, you can even be talking about your logistics. You need to have your logistics in order. You need to have your input supplies in order. You need to have everything in order for you to make it. And I think one other important aspect is value addition. You find that a simple process like cutting those sweet potatoes, if you grow the required varieties, if you take it a step further, and like I mentioned, one of the most utilized way or ways in which the sweet potatoes are consumed is as sweet potato chips. If you simply cut the sweet potatoes into chips and you package them as sweet potato chips, you can enhance your value in terms of your exports by merely cutting those sweet potatoes. So you need to consider that. And the aspect of research is very important. I think one issue that one mistake most farmers make is you grow and then you start looking for the market afterwards. We always, as Zimtrade, we always recommend you need to look for the market first and then commit to what you can do or supply, and then you start growing for the market rather than marketing your produce at the end of the season. And we need to promote products in the region and beyond. We need to improve the ease of doing export business, and it's an aspect that as Zimtrade, we're very passionate about. And we also need to leverage on existing trade agreements. Zimbabwe is a signatory to the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU, which gives us duty-free, quota-free access to the market. And we also have other trade agreements in the region. We are signatory to SADC, COMESA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we even have other bilateral agreements with some companies in the region. So we need to leverage on these agreements as they all make our products more competitive. And we need to make use of resources being offered by development cooperation partners. We have, I think one aspect that is important to note is on export development, we have technical intervention programs where we have an MOU with an organization called PUM, which is an organization of senior experts based in the Netherlands. And they basically assist farmers. In this case, they can assist farmers in varying areas of your production. It can be your agronomy issues, it can be your water issues, it can be your soil issues. And these services come free, basically. If you apply for the services and you're granted, all you have to do is take care of the experts' local accommodation and food, and travel if you need to take them anywhere. In terms of their international tickets, that's catered for by the organization. So these are resources that are available at our disposal. At the moment, because of COVID, they're only doing this through what they're calling remote coaching. But there's still a lot of people who are benefiting through even the remote coaching. You get expert advice for free. And I think it's something that we need to consider. And then obviously market diversification is an important aspect. So in terms of how we can be contacted, that's our website, Zimtrade, our trade information portal, www.tradezimbabwe.co.zw. Some of the information that I've already shared here is available on the website through newsletters, articles, and they're very other. I think there's a lot of information that might be beneficial to a lot of people here. And in terms of that's our phone number, and our head office is located at number 188 2nd Street Extension, just after the robot. That's after the SPCA turn. If you look to your left, and I think right now, if you wish to visit, there's a lot of construction going on, so you won't miss it. And then we also have an office in Bulawayo at number 48 Josiah Tungoga.
Thank you very much for that informed presentation.